So I think it's initiative, and on this side of the desk in work that I do now, it's interest.
Right.
There is such a beauty when a student ambles into your office. My first year here at the University of Maryland 5 years ago, I walked into the academic wing of the building, and I encountered a student. It was his first day, and I said, "So how's your first day going?" And I expected some non-answer
Right.
because who is the stranger and why is she talking to me? Not this young man. He was like,
Okay.
"This is the best day ever," and started talking about this day. And he was like, "I'm enjoying our conversation. Can I come back to your office and talk to you?" And he did. And then as he left, he was like, "Could we have regular appointments where we just have conversations like this?" And so for 4 years' time, he put himself on my calendar for once a month for one of these conversations. So I think it's not just, I want to do something. I'm really interested in you as a human, and can I talk to you? Can I connect with you?
Welcome again, everybody, to the Zelnik Exchange podcast. I am your host, Corey Zelnik, and today I have this wonderful opportunity to speak to Dr. Dawn Jourdan. She is the Dean of the School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation at the University of Maryland. And most of you know that's close to my heart. I am a graduate, as is my daughter. Dawn and I are going to talk about the department and her career and how she got there and all other things related to real estate, architecture, planning, University of Maryland, and anything else. So let me read Dr. Jourdan in. Dr. Dawn Jourdan is Dean of the School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation at the University of Maryland, where she leads an interdisciplinary community of architects, planners, preservationists, and real estate developers committed to shaping more just, vibrant, and sustainable places. Trained as both a lawyer and an urban planner, Dr. Jourdan holds a J.D. and a Ph.D. in urban and regional planning. This dual expertise uniquely positions her at the intersection of law, policy, and the built environment. Her scholarship and teaching have established her as a national thought leader in constitutional law and land use, with a distinctive specialization in the regulation of signs and wayfinding. She has written extensively on how the First Amendment informs local government's ability to regulate signs, balancing free expression with community character, safety, and economic vitality. As Dean, Dr. Jourdan champions a vision for the School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation that leverages design, planning, preservation, and development to inspire positive change, preparing the next generation of professionals to design and steward places where people and communities thrive. Welcome to the show, Dr. Jourdan. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to this. Obviously, you and I have a little history, and we'll get into that. But most importantly, I like to always speak with my guests and understand their journey as to how they got where they are today. So give me a little backstory on you, please.
Sure. Well, I don't think anybody grows up dreaming to be the dean of a college.
Okay.
I don't think they teach that in elementary school. I am the product of two lovely parents who were very young when they had me. They were 16 and 17.
All right.
And so they were discovering the world themselves. I'm their only child together. And, I was raised in the country in a 4-bedroom house that was rented, that was on a sod farm. And my parents grew everything we ate. And my dad was a carpenter, and we lived a pretty simple life. And I had the outdoors to explore. I always had the outdoors to explore. And, when my parents grew up and made progress and had other jobs, we had a nice home on 5 acres of land in the country. So
Where in the country?
I grew up in Belton, Missouri, which is 30 miles south of Kansas City.
Nice.
It's a sleepy town that didn't change until about 10 years ago, when Kansas City really started to suburbanize and move south a long ways. Lived in the country. I can remember, going to the bus stop in the morning, and either our outside dog or every once in a while a rogue cow would get out of a neighbor's pasture and come stand by the bus stop with me.
Sure.
So it was a very strange experience. I got a really good education at a country school.
Nice.
Great teachers, and they pushed really hard. I didn't have parents that pushed. They they encouraged, they didn't push, but the teachers, they pushed because they saw somebody that they wanted to have a big, beautiful life. And because of that, all of the things that teachers do to find the special gifts of students, I found my way into speech and debate and theater. And so spent a lot of time, cultivating that very public side of myself and student government and all of the things. I can remember participating in city government day in high school and, being the mayor of a town. And that was exciting.
Okay.
I didn't really have any thought about what that meant, but I was going into high school or in high school at the time period where the Berlin Wall came down.
All right.
And so there was a lot happening in the world, and it was a really exciting time, a really hopeful, optimistic time. And I went to college thinking that I was going to be in federal government. I really wanted to be a senator. That seemed like the way you made change. And I don't know how realistic that was. Nobody told me it was unrealistic. So I grew up with immense support and encouragement. And then I got to college. I went to Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois, on speech and theater scholarship. I went there because they had the best speech program in the country at the time and wanted to be there. Right. And I took my first class in politics. And the class we read a book about how the Clean Water Act was made. And it was really hard for me to stomach. I guess it was my first real wake-up call of what politics is and how complicated it is and how much compromise, and that law may start with a really good idea, and then at the end it is sometimes a compromise settlement that gets us close to the ball, but not all the way. Yeah. And I went to my advisor to quit, to abandon my major and say, I want to do something else.
Really?
And Dr. Curtis was a very special man. And he said, have you ever thought about local government? And I hadn't thought about local government except when I was the mayor of my little city for a day.
Right.
And he took me to the planning and zoning office of Peoria County, Illinois. And they welcomed me in as an intern. They hired me just on his recommendation. I don't know if they were even looking. I mean, it was such a lovely place that I didn't have a car in college, and the planning director would pick me up and take me to work with her every day and take me home at the end of the day. But I learned a lot. They were doing a comprehensive plan at the time. And that's, the big process where the community comes together with the local government and envisions its future. And I really fell in love with the process.
And they were building. What was the development? What was the plan to build?
It was a comprehensive plan. So it was the future of the whole community. So it wasn't related to a particular development. Mm-hmm. Peoria was an interesting town. It was a post-industrial town on a river. Caterpillar tractor was home there. So the vitality of the town was often a product of how healthy Caterpillar was at the time. Sure. And so it went through a lot. It was a place that had suburbanized and sort of left downtown behind. In the early 1990s, it hadn't found its way back to vibrancy. And so the comprehensive planning process was, suburbanites wanting more space and rural people wanting to protect what was rural. And it was this very, it's the same story everywhere when you do planning. And it was handled by a well-known consultant who happened to be a land use lawyer. Okay. And I saw them come in and I saw their dual credentials and I thought, maybe that's what I want to do. I want to be able to go to multiple communities, not just one, but a lot of communities and do this process. And so from there, I went to planning and law school together at the University of Kansas. I chose that place because it was close to home and my grandmother asked me to come home. So when grandmother asks you to go home.
Understood.
Lawrence, Kansas is a great place to live. Yes. It is a hidden gem in the middle of the country. And I got a great education there. The man who ran the planning program, who I would ultimately write my book with, was a planner lawyer. And so there was somebody like me right away. He had mentored a lot of planner lawyers in the Kansas City area. And so I found my way into some really prominent internships right away which was extraordinary.
Sure.
While I went to law school, I went to the National American Planning Association conference, and I saw a lawyer give a speech on, I think he was probably talking about tax increment finance. And I was very excited. And back then was not email, it was letter.
Sure.
And so I wrote him a letter and I said, I'm one of you. I'm doing this dual degree. You should hire me. Not knowing whether that was something you did or not. I just did it. And within a week's time, he had called me and invited me to Chicago for an interview.
It's great. It's great. And just to jump in a little bit, I think that, because we see, the various people that I speak with all the time, we always talk about, initiative and pushing and, being in the room and, and things like that. And, and a lot of the people that I speak with, there's a certain salesmanship aspect to what they do. And you're not that in that same realm, right? You develop projects and things like that, so you have to sell a little bit. But I think that the salient point is that people respect and appreciate initiative. And, it sounds like, you dove right in and they were receptive to it. So I think that's a big credit to you.
So I think it's initiative, and on this side of the desk in the work that I do now, it's interest.
Right.
There is such a beauty when a student ambles into your office. My first year here at the University of Maryland 5 years ago, mm-hmm. I walked into the academic wing of the building, and I encountered a student. It was his first day, and I said, So how's your first day going? And, I expected some non-answer because... Right. Who is the stranger and why is she talking to me? Not this young man. He was like, This is the best day ever. And started talking about this day. And he was like, I'm enjoying our conversation. Can I come back to your office and talk to you? And He did. And then as he left, he was like, could we have regular appointments where we just have conversations like this? And so for 4 years' time, he put himself on my calendar for once a month for one of these conversations. So I think it's not just, I want to do something. I'm really interested in you as a human, and can I talk to you? Can I connect with you?
Boy, that guy, that's the start of a great story. I don't know who he is, where he is, or what he's doing, but that's the start of a good story, I think.
Yeah, he is the youngest student we've ever had in the School of Architecture. Okay. He graduated high school like 16. He graduated community college by 17. He came and did his undergraduate degree, and he was done by 19. So we encouraged him to stay for his master's. Okay. And he's working on his master's degree. He took one of our travel scholarships and went all over. I think he went to Vietnam and Bali and some other places to learn about bamboo construction techniques. So, he is unique, but he is like a lot of the students at the University of Maryland. They are curious and they are hungry for experience. Nice. And brave,
Sure. Oh, good for him. That's very exciting. Very exciting. Yeah. So please, so keep going with your story.
Finished well. So I went to clerk for that firm in Chicago.
Right, and you're in law school at that time.
Right. I'm doing both of my degrees at the same time. It takes 4 years instead of 5 years if you do them both together. Okay. And this is at the end of my third year, and I spend the summer with them. And living in Chicago for a girl who grew up in the country is like living at Disneyland. I can't characterize it in any other way. Okay. Every time you walk out of your door, it is a unique experience. And it wasn't terrifying. It was just interesting. All right. And so that summer went well. And the firm invited me to join them before I finished my last year. So I knew I had a job going back. Good. It was interesting going back because by the time I went back, that firm had merged with the 5th largest firm in the country. Or in the world at the time. They were Berg, Weaver, and Prell, and they became Holland and Knight. So it was a huge transition. But I worked in the state and local government practice for a bunch of brilliant attorneys. I can't say that I've ever worked for smarter people. And they represented mostly local governments. there was some variation, but within Chicago there are hundreds of small local governments. So we represented something like 80 local governments.
Wow.
And because of the huge conflicts of interest of representing developers at the same time, it was mostly local governments. But I learned a lot. And, it's not just about zoning. You have to learn about pension plans and kind of the litany of local government issues.
Sure.
And I learned very quickly. But I also experienced winter in Chicago. And while I grew up in Kansas City, there's nothing like winter in Chicago.
I'll give you a winter. I'll give you a winter in New York every night.
Okay, maybe that. That I lived on Lake Michigan. I lived right across the street from Navy Pier, so I was living the life. But I could not imagine that life for myself long term, and I became frustrated really quickly because the clients were really excited that I was an urban planner. And they always wanted to know what the best planning outcome was. And that was great that they were asking. But then they would always ask what the law required. And as you know, in your work, there is a huge mismatch between the beautiful dream and what the law mandates.
Oh, of course.
And most people, unless they are not terrified of risk or unless they have a lot of profit to make if they take some risk, are going to choose the least risky option.
Right.
And so I got really frustrated very quickly that we weren't doing the good, big work, I mean, there was good, big work happening. I was young and idealistic. But I was also troubled by the fact that so many planners and local government officials were terrified by attorneys, their own and particularly developers' attorneys.
Sure.
And we are trained to be advocates. We are paid to be scary, right? To get what we want.
But you seem to have, it seemed in listening, you have a clear path. It seems like you have a clear path, and you had tremendous opportunity to follow along that clear path. I think that in listening to you, there's more heart and soul in you in terms of what you want to go after in these projects. And I'd imagine, and maybe you take me there on the next part of this conversation, about how you start to utilize the law with what's sort of in your heart and in your mind.
Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to do. And so I decided that going back to school was the way to go back and become a teacher, to become an educator. Because if I could teach planners not to be enough about the law, to ask questions, not to be lawyers, and if I could teach lawyers what is inside planners' heads, what they know, because in law we're trained principals. We're not trained necessarily to make great landscape policy changes.
Right.
And so I envisioned this opportunity to teach. Again, that's a show of my naivete, maybe, because the academy isn't just about teaching. It is about all the other things that faculty do. But I went, back with the best of intention. I did my Ph.D. at Florida State. Florida was a really interesting place to study, as it turns out, because Florida is a growth management state. So there is state level control over local decision making when you do planning at a particular scale. And, that is unique. Maryland is a little bit like that, but not as aggressive as Florida. And, there are all kinds of good and bad associated with that. But when you think about Florida, that was growing 1,500 people a day for a very long period of time. How much development that necessitates. It's not even great for the development community because they're wondering where their infrastructure is coming from and, how are they going to get the support they need to make sure that their communities have schools and roads and water supply systems and all of the things. So it was a great time to be in Florida.
Yeah. And I apologize. Just because, speaking of Florida and the amount, I'm here in New York and we're constantly hearing about New Yorkers leaving New York to go to Florida, blah, blah, blah. But even just being in the real estate business, you can't help but see the articles. I mean, there has been an enormous amount of development, whether you talk about Miami or Palm Beach or all the other areas in between. Do you get the chance, or I don't want to say do you care, but do you look at what it's become today compared to what you were looking at back then, when at that point, like you said, when you look at it then, there was so much development going on. I would imagine what's going on today is tenfold, 20-fold of what that was.
Well, when I was in Florida, so I've been in Florida twice.
Okay.
I finished the Ph.D. I got a first job at Texas A&M,
Okay.
straight out of school, great position, really enjoyed the time. I was quickly recruited to the University of Florida, and they had a joint appointment between the planning and the law school, which was huge. It was a great opportunity. It was super because I brought planning and law students together in the same classroom to have those conversations, to do projects together. So that group of students probably got the best education of any of my students in the past because they learned to talk to each other. But while all of that was happening, there was a lot happening in the state. There was a lot of political change in the state. And the new governor really took issue with state level planning and really felt like state level planning was getting in the way of development. And so there was a new law passed that lessened state interference with local government planning and changed things substantially. And, a lot of the planning community said it's about time. Things hadn't been working well for a long time. This really isn't the solution, but something needed to happen. So as a result of that, most of the power was given back to local governments to make decisions about growth. And, local governments are the best experts in their own spaces. What is challenging in a fast-growing place like Florida, as you know, is that development doesn't just happen within the bounds of a community. It's not perfect, right? So, a development may happen outside of a city or outside of a county, but really be dependent on the neighboring city or county's infrastructure or job base or whatever. So in the absence of state growth management, that's really been left to the local governments to come together to sort that out. And that's not easy in any way, and it's not always successful. It's often done by, the metropolitan planning organizations that focus on transportation and road systems. They're the best arbiter.
Well, it's planners, lawyers, and referees.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so Florida continues to grow. It will always continue to grow. I think it is an attractive space, and depending on where you are, the growth is uneven and it's different. Miami has exploded. And Miami has exploded in some ways because of foreign investment from South America. And it has made it this beautiful, vibrant, interesting place. So, it's fantastic in some ways. There's a lot of counter work to make sure that people who lived there before aren't displaced. And I think there's always some effort to make sure that happens. Miami's complicated, though, as it develops at such a high rate, whatever happens with the ocean will affect Miami.
So when you talk about, so I'm curious, like when you see that going on, just as, you're a planning professional, do you look at it and just step back and look at it as a spectator and say, wow, that's unbelievable, or wow, that's insane, or do you ever take that perspective on something like that?
Yeah. So I think about those issues a lot. While I was on the faculty at the University of Florida, I worked with a great interdisciplinary team of scholars, from planning to engineering to kind of the whole litany of a group of people in the Guantanamo Matanzas Reserve over by St. Augustine. A beautiful federal reserve, and they were looking at what sea level rise would mean for their lands, but they were also curious what would happen to St. Augustine and some of the neighboring towns. And so we started holding meetings with the public to share early models of what could happen. And this was early days, so this was probably almost 20 years ago. And this taught me about engaging communities in things they don't want to talk about yet. it was rough. My job on the project was to create community engagement strategy.
Sure.
That's what I love to do.
Right.
And, you know, first nobody wanted to participate. And then hurricane, I think it was Tropical Storm Sandy happened on the East Coast.
Yep.
The next night we held a public meeting and it was standing room only, right? Because that could happen to a place. And so we started having conversations about, how would you make decisions? Where would you shift development? Because we knew development wouldn't stop. That wasn't realistic. But where would you shift it so it was safe? How dense would it need to be to accommodate the population? What would you do with these areas that are vulnerable? Do you mitigate? Do you armor? Which strategies work and at what level? And, we did all of that work, and some of the communities have really brought that into their planning process. And I can see that in particular places. When I look at Pinellas County, Florida, they were an early thinker about what all these things would mean. Even in Miami, when I'll ask about sea level rise, somebody will quickly say, oh, no, we build things up high enough now. It's not a problem.
Right.
And great, except the roads aren't high. And so, there are all these lovely pictures of Miami with sailboats and canals and all the things. Clearly, that's not sustainable. So I think it is an interesting challenge for us to contemplate. The most telling experience of this whole period of my life was the first presentation we gave. We went to the Sierra Club to practice, just a local chapter, and gave them the hard news of what this could look like. And one of the women said, "That's the most interesting thing I've ever seen. I'm glad I'll be dead when it happens."
Oh God. Okay, that's feedback.
Yeah, well, but I think that is planners plan for this long scale. Designers, developers, we all do things for a long timeline. When you build something, you're not thinking about 5 years. You're thinking about how is this thing going to weather forever, and if it doesn't weather forever, what goes into its space after that? And so I think it was telling that, there are the things we can handle right now that people are ready to process and go there with us. And then there are those things that maybe they're not ready for, but we have to put some things in place. So when they happen, we are ready, whether everybody was ready to go there at the same time or not. When this project started, we were not able to use the word sea level rise. The state government didn't use that terminology. And so for 2 years' time, I ran around the state of Florida calling sea level rise coastal dynamic shifts. Because the sea always shifts. It doesn't mean that somebody did it. It just means that it shifts, and people could talk about it that way. And then mid-project, we could say sea level rise, but we couldn't say climate change because climate change meant that somebody did it. And so this is 20 years ago, though. And so I think that experience taught me a lot about every disruption, or what to do when a disruption comes. I mean, the disruption that you're dealing with, that I'm dealing with right now, is AI, right?
Yes.
And there's a lot of talk, and there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of hope, and we're very divided on it and what it might mean for everything. But it does give us a space to start a conversation and at least put it all on the table.
Yeah, well, we may be divided on it, but it's there, right? So it's really going to be about, figuring it out. You could be divided whichever side you're on. You need to figure it out, kind of thing. But so now I'll say to you, you're in Florida. You have a great Florida story. Do you start to work your way up the coast? How do you get from Florida to Maryland? Is there something in between?
Oh my gosh, no. Of course, there's not a linear line in this story.
I was just working the real estate aspect.
You were wishing. So when I was at Florida, I had all these opportunities. I guess you get the sense about me that I jump in, I learn very quickly, I grow, and I'm ready for the next thing. The next thing happened to be a department head job at the University of Oklahoma in Norman, Oklahoma. And, it was a great job. I worked for a dean who I had met at Texas A&M, who was a friend. He invited me up. One of my former students was on the faculty, and my family was a 4-hour drive. So it's a nice.
I was gonna say, it brings you home. It sort of,
Kind of home,
you
right?
say Oklahoma to me, that brings you back to the country. That brings you back to country.
Oklahoma was an interesting experience.
Right.
The week we moved there, it had been 105 for 50 days, right? And the earth was cracked and all the things. I can remember the first time it rained. I was sitting in a conference room with a bunch of academic leaders. There were windows on both sides. It started raining on one side of the building. The meeting stopped. We stopped talking and we turned our chairs and watched it rain. And then it moved over to the other side of the building and we didn't speak. We simply sat there and watched it rain. So, Oklahoma was a great place to go for a lot of reasons.
Right.
It was a great place to pick up the climate change story.
Sure.
Because I went from too much water to too little water to be able to talk about drought.
Yep.
My boss at the time, all deans do this, so I do this to people too now, which is what makes your program unique, right? What is it that, what should attract students here and all the things. And Oklahoma is the end of the Trail of Tears, right? It is where the Native Americans were marched.
Sure.
And there are more than 300 registered tribes that live there. And that makes Oklahoma really unique. But just because they're there doesn't mean they have a relationship with the university or the local government or anything like that. But I made it my mission to figure out how we were going to cultivate that relationship. And because students drive everything in my world, I was sitting in my office one day and this lovely, tall, redheaded woman marched into my office and said, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, and I want to plan with tribes." And I thought, oh no, I don't have any connections and have no idea how to help you learn that. And she said, "It's okay. I already have a mentor. I'd like to introduce you to him." And she introduced me to the economic development director for the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, who was a remarkable man. He also served as the police chief. And he was really interested, and he was a connector. He had studied, water policy. And so he started making connections right away. And I started knocking on doors of people and asking to help. I ended up partnering with the Chickasaw and the Choctaw Nations doing some climate action planning. And we did a great participatory project. All of my students and colleagues went into 5 different tribes to do different kinds of water planning, participatory water planning. It was really interesting. We were prepared to plan for drought, then Oklahoma had floods. And so we got to prepare for drought and floods at the same time. But that was a great experience. Oklahoma was really interesting. From Oklahoma, Texas A&M invited me back. And they said, "We hear you want to be a dean. We can make that happen really fast."
All right.
Our executive associate dean has just stepped down, and we know you. We want you to come home. And I didn't give it a second thought because it seemed like a really good challenge at a great university that had been very kind to me. And I did that for 5 years. And I worked for a dean that had been there for a long time. And he was like, "Here are the keys to the kingdom. It is yours.
Nice.
Go out and conquer." And I did. There was as you may know, looking at the press, A&M had a little bit of leadership change then. They've had a little bit more now.
Right.
It's a great institution. There are so many good things. I learned so much there. But one of the members of my board happened to be on the board of visitors at the university, or at our university, at the University of Maryland.
Nice.
And when the dean's job opened up here, I applied for it because it was interdisciplinary. It was all the programs. It was architecture, planning, historic preservation, and real estate development, all of the things that I'm passionate about.
Sure.
And when I was shortlisted, I thought, oh no, I have to tell this man who is a donor to Texas A&M that I'm a traitor, and I'm going to jump ship. And I called him up, and he brought this beautiful red book, which was prepared by my colleagues to celebrate their 50th anniversary. And he said, "I think this is amazing. I will be in the room interviewing you with the Board of Visitors, and I am told afterward, because I'm not an architect, and most of my
Right.
colleagues are architects, so I'm scary in some ways. But Mr. Adams, Harold Adams, told my colleagues on the line that it had been a great pleasure to work for me. And even though he was the donor and I worked for him,
For him, right.
He threw my going away party. He made sure that my transition was solid here. He passed away not too long after I arrived here. And yeah, it was a big loss. And his wife, Janice Adams, and his children have stayed active in my progress here. They funded a charrette at Texas A&M that brings undergraduate students together for a weekend challenge to work in interdisciplinary teams. And I ran it when I was at A&M for a couple of years.
Nice.
And so my colleagues invited my students to participate the first year I was here, and then again in the second year. And the third year, they said, why don't you host it? We'll all come to D.C. And so they all came, and the Adams family has stayed in touch with us.
That's great. I think
we're a small community, right?
Yeah, I see that, and and listening, your path has been, quite frankly, I'm sure there were bumps in the road, but very, very smooth, and it's just a great little, story, and now you're running the show, right, in Maryland. You and I came together, through the department, and I think it's so exciting, what goes on there. And this is certainly not about my participation. It's minimal at best. But I think that what you're doing there with respect to the existence of architectural and planning and things like that, we've talked about a lot. It's sort of enhancing the program, if that's the right word, with a little bit more of a real estate focus. So how has that been going? I know it's been a process. How are you doing with that at this point?
Yeah. So for years, architecture was the largest program in the college. The college was founded only with an architecture program. And the architecture program was a Bachelor of Science in Architecture that, you had to get a master's. So, it was a limited enrollment. Architecture developed an interdisciplinary Bachelor's of Arts in Architecture, and that grew like gangbusters. It went from 10 to, multiple hundred within a few years, because there was such demand by students to do architecture adjacent work, right?
Okay.
And we didn't have any other undergraduate opportunities in the college. Colleagues before me, Maria Day Marshall, Margaret McFarland, they had this idea that real estate development was very much a part of who we were. And they started a master's program. So we've had a master's in real estate development program for about 20 years.
Okay.
And in the last decade, they started talking about what if we had an undergraduate program that allowed students to do this. And so just before I came, about 6 years ago, maybe 7, they approved the curriculum for an undergraduate program. And like many things, there weren't a lot of asks along with the curriculum. We just had this new program and we were going to launch it.
Right.
And we didn't think about how much money or how many people.
Sure.
And when I came, one of my first cautions was, yeah, that's a great idea, but how's this going to work? Because universities have their own financial model, and just because you bring in more students doesn't necessarily mean the money flows the same way.
Right.
And so I in partnership with Provost Rice, came up with the funds to help launch the undergraduate program in real estate, which started at about 10 students because students transferred in. They knew this was coming, so they waited for the couple of years, and they transferred in at their junior year. And we were able to get them out in 2 years, right? Because the curriculum is such that we can get them through this wonderful program. In a few years' time, we've gone from 10 students to about 150. And I think the sky's probably the limit on the students. And they're very interesting. They come because they have this deep passion in understanding land markets and what kinds of things, whether they be houses, businesses, etc., can be put into action. They really, you know, they're not. They may be thinking about designing places. They may be thinking about planning places, but they're really thinking about actualizing places.
Yeah, I
And
think that if I go back to, I guess it was 19. It was pre-COVID, so it was 2019 or maybe late 18. I forget exactly. When I came down with give shout outs to my partners Gene Spiegelman and Barry Zeller, all graduates of Maryland, to come down and speak really more about real estate to the department than anything else. And I think that they got a kick out of it, because we certainly have a different approach to it than the School of Architecture and Planning, although it all comes together, but we attack it from a different perspective. And I think they enjoyed that. And that's what we did it several times, and then COVID hit and we did it via Zoom. Yeah. But I think that there was a feel for something a little bit different than what they were doing on a day-to-day.
yeah, well, and I think you did something in partnership together that has been transformative for us. So our college is known for study abroad and out of the classroom experiences. We take students to see things because that's what we do. We make
Sure.
things, so we want them to see other places and other things. And what was surprising to me is how few of our students had really gotten to know New York City, for example. You know,
Yep.
it's not so far away. Maybe they'd been up for a weekend with their parents, but they didn't really get to know the city. And so when we were talking with you over lunch that first time, you said, we really want you to bring the students up. What would that take? And that conversation ended up being a field trip that's in its third year at its inception,
Yep.
where we bring somewhere between 12 and 30 students, depending on the year, from all the disciplines, because
Sure.
we think it's important that they learn to talk to each other and have experiences together. We bring them to the city to meet with the development community, with local government, with nonprofits, kind of the whole litany of people. And it's such a transformative experience. If I had one wish, it would be the wish that we could do this with all of them at some point in their academic careers, if they haven't had the experience. This year, I had the pleasure. So, it is lovely to travel with students, but I have to remember my age. And that when I sit down at a table with a bunch of students, that doesn't just mean they're going to open up and share everything. Usually they're going to share something critical or something I need to fix.
Okay.
But somehow I ended up at the table with 5 gentlemen from at least 2 of the programs who started talking about their lives and what they wanted from their lives and the way they reflect about self and the way they serve humanity and so forth. And it was the best conversation I think I had last year. So without the New York City field trip, I don't think I would have had the conversation that fed my soul for at least 2 months after it. So I want to thank you for that.
Oh, no, thank you. You're very welcome. I think that's great. I think it's great. And the trip up this year, I know we got to all spend some time together over at the World Trade Center, which was fabulous. World Trade Center is in the news again these days. They signed a major lease with American Express to do their headquarters, and that will allow them to build the last building. It's the last lot in the World Trade Center area to be developed. So that's very exciting for the city and for the whole downtown community. And then actually, as of this morning, and I don't know what date we're going to put this out there, but this is early summer, and they just made an announcement about an entertainment/restaurant venue that's taking about 50,000 square feet on the second and third floor, a little bit of a ground floor entrance. So there's so many exciting things. The World Trade Center is historic for many great reasons, and also one of the saddest occurrences, in the history of our country. But it was great. It's very positive, and I think it's timely with our conversation today. And I think that the things that you're doing down at Maryland are wonderful. I'm going to continue to follow. I'm going to continue to be a part of it. And I know that you and I will stay in touch. And you have to have coffee or breakfast or something with me whenever you're here. And I really look forward to it. Dean. I love calling you Dean Jourdan because it's wonderful.
Dawn is fine.
But I just want to go with Dawn. But Dawn, I love your backstory. I love what you've done and the things that you're doing at Maryland. And I really can't thank you enough for spending time with me. It's been my pleasure to listen in. I know my listeners will enjoy this conversation. And on the next field trip, we're going to do a remote video of some sort, and we'll tie it into this discussion for later viewing. So at this point, I just want to say thank you so much again for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your summer, and I look forward to speaking with you again real soon.
Thank you, and thanks for all the ways you support us.